desperate to build, then they have no incentive to bid more. So it creates a funny kind of moral hazard with respect to, maybe moral hazard is the right word for it, but it creates a situation where they have you at a disadvantage because they know that you want to get the project out the door. But anyways, and they have an extensive capital plan, and I suggest that you once again read that deck if you want to see all the programs that they are working on and that they have uh, plans to consider. We can see some of the Focus 40 factoring in with some of the longer term plans. So that's that. I mean, we weren't really being critical. I mean, we're really just accepting information. But if folks want us to follow up in some way, be happy to take your comments and follow up. And in addition to that, we looked at the pro forma for the next 5 years. And on all three scenarios, one where ridership returns quite a bit closer to normal, and the other two where there's less ridership. In all cases, there's a pretty hefty budget deficit. And so it's just the reality of the situation. And Oh, another big thing that we talked about briefly, and I think we really do need to delve into it a lot more, is the progress on AFC 2.0 and especially the proof of payment aspect of it. And there's a very good deck at the last meeting, the March 8th meeting, and it talks about how they plan on doing training and enforcement, and I think it's very well detailed. And they are, I don't know if they're in the process now of taking public comments, but it's certainly something I think we are going to want to comment on. And so, as I said, we touched on it briefly. We need to touch on it a lot more. And that's going to be the plan for the next meeting. And we may even consider having Stephen Andrews come and talk with us because they did equity analysis of the AFC 2.0, not so much from the enforcement point of view, but more so from the additional access points for the media that they're going to have, because the whole point of this is that you need to have paid for your ride before you get on the system. So we need to make sure that we have the ability for people to do that beforehand. And they also did equity analysis on another aspect, and I forget what it is now, but I think Stephen Andrews has done a couple, maybe even 3 equity analysis reports. So we'll want to talk with him about those. So I'm sorry if my memory's a little spotty. It's just up late last night and had another meeting. And so if you have any questions, feel free to ask. I'll answer them as best I can. And is there gaps that you want me to fill? Your questions will help me fill those gaps.
Hey, thank you, Len. I'm sorry, go ahead, Emily.
Oh yeah, I'll just jump in that I've been helping Stephen with some of the service equity analyses. We have like maybe 3 or 4 going on right now. So if there's anything specific, I'm happy to.
Oh, that's wonderful.
On them too.
That's wonderful, because even though I very much would like to see Stephen. With you involved. No. I know he's
there
busy
might be questions that he needs to talk to too.
No.
But I can be a first pass.
Yeah, no, I'm sure you'll be fine. And you can also go and follow up with Stephen. So I was going to say, as much as I'd like to see him, having you here, with that firsthand knowledge is even more valuable, because now we don't have to schedule. You're just a readily available resource. So that's great. I'm glad to hear that. And so thank you. And yeah, okay. It's also good to know that it was more than 2 reports, because I was thinking it seemed like it was 3 that they had reported on.
There's many.
Yeah. Well, good. It's good that we're doing lots of equity analysis. So, and maybe you can help make that box a little more transparent.
We're trying.
yeah, because and Stephen will tell you mean, if you report back to him about this meeting, that one of the things that I find a little frustrating is that I don't really get to see the equations that lead to the final numbers that we see, because essentially you all say, well, we've done this analysis, and look, it's whatever. And I trust you all, but it really would be helpful to see how you derive that number. And I know it's cumbersome with a lot of steps, but I'm so curious, and I think it's just kind of good science, where you kind of put your work out there and people can look at it, and there may be a mistake, there may be a way to do it better, and it's just good science, and I know it takes effort and time to do that, and I also understand very intensely how your time is budgeted, that a project is slated to come in at X number of dollars, and to do this extra work, it's like it's got to come from somewhere. And so the more I think about it, it might have to be a UPWP request, right? So yeah. All right. Well, thanks. Yeah. I'll quit yapping. Any other questions? Go ahead.
If there's any specifics about, and I did a lot of work on calculating the low income threshold for the service rate, the MBTA service area, and then also how we come to minority thresholds, of like how many residents in a census tract dictates whether it's a percentage minority or not. I'm happy to speak to that, but yeah, for the individual equations, I hear you. I think they should be shared as widely as possible, but there's barriers
I hear you.
For all of that. But I hear you. I think the more eyes on it, the better everybody is in the end. But
right. Good.
That's something that we will keep in mind moving forward, for sure.
Yeah, I understand. And I know that there's nothing nefarious going on there, and I know that there are lots of eyes internally on it, but as I said, people who know me know just how intensely curious I am about stuff. And sometimes there's a block to my understanding something if I can't see the steps in between. I just get kind of hung up on that. It just blocks me from truly comprehending things. So that's part of the reason that I asked. But like I said, if I know that if something was awry, or if you wouldn't bake the results. I have no doubt about that. So anyways, anything else from anyone else?
Yeah, Len, I got two things. One just to comment. I think we all know that Brian is super interested in payments, and especially in payments in communities that lack a lot of capital. So, do we know when Brian is coming back? If that topic is going to come up at a future meeting, will he be back?
I don't know when he's coming back. I didn't ask him. That's usually the kind of thing that I'd let the other person volunteer. Especially since I'm not an employer.
Yeah. Well, we can check. We can check offline with him because I think it'd be nice to give him the benefit of continuity there. And then I had something for Emily, not necessarily to answer right now, but what. I think we've discussed before, whether Clinton's executive order on environmental justice is given equal weight to civil rights. I don't really, not calling for a discussion of that right now, but that's an ongoing concern of mine. And coupled with that, with the new capital infusion we expect in another large federal economic bill, which I think will be a challenge for CTPS as well as the T, because getting money suddenly that you haven't planned for is not easy to deploy efficiently. But one thing that always concerns me is if we maintain a state of good repair framing on our investments, what that means is that the people who have the most T assets are likely to get most of that state of good repair funding. And I think we have to be careful about checking that. And this comes back to your analysis, Emily, checking that folks who may have subpar service are not excluded just because we keep focusing on state of good repair of the same assets that we already have. Does that make sense? And, I'm not looking for an answer now. I just wanted to raise that as an issue.
Sure. Yeah, I can ask about some things. Just to clarify, so you're asking for equity in service as that relates to the assets that move through them.
Yeah,
To provide the service.
Yeah, because
Okay.
Historically the investments have not been even across the board in our region, and especially in communities of low income or environmental justice population, if they're already left out, I don't want us to blindly support reinvestment in the same places all over again.
Okay.
Over other people who didn't get those capital investments in the first place. And that, I think that's an issue for your analysis. When we get to it. So with that, can we move on to a report on marketing and operations? And if no one else has a question. So would that be you, Stefan?
I think so. I got my computer up enough to, I just opened up the notes. So give me a sec. I think I can jump over.
Recording in progress.
Hey, now I'm over here on the computer properly. Okay, thank goodness. I still don't know what happened to my computer, but at least it's running again. Okay, let me find the notes and see if this comes through. Yep. Okay, actually, I'll make it a little bit bigger before we're ready.
Or I could get a magnifying glass.
How's that? Is that better? Tolerable?
Yep.
Okay, cool. I will just summarize since the notes are up here. But the special guest that we had was Logan Nash and Kevin Mulder, both from the real-time data customer communications group of the T. And let me put this. Is this still shared? Nope, it just. All right. Can you guys still see that?
Yep.
Okay, good. I'll try to talk to the camera, which is always obviously better. Again, sorry, I'm all out of kilter here.
No, you're coming through clear. Don't worry.
So the Logan and Kevin, again, they're in the real-time data group of customer technology at the T. And the primary, the first discussion topic was about crowding information, the pandemic response of how can the agency provide as accurate as possible a sense of how crowded is the bus that is about to pick me up? How crowded is the red line right now? How does the agency do that? How does it collect the data? I'll just summarize my notes that it was saying that the passenger, oh my goodness, help me out with the T and PTC, passenger something counter. I'm having a brain aneurysm.
Oh, the APC, the automatic passenger
Right,
counter.
it's not, that's the wrong acronym.
Yeah, it's
Thank
positive. You did positive
Yes,
train
I
control.
did. Yes, I did. No wonder it's not the right automatic passenger counter. Thank you for that correction. Automatic passenger counting was they judged about 80% accurate. And amazingly, they were able to verify the real-time crowding by looking at the security recordings from select vehicles. In other words, a set of interns would look at selected recordings from bus vehicles, compare what they observed on the vehicle to the automatic passenger counting data. With 80% accuracy, they said that that is good enough, I mean, better than expected, to be able to go live, as I took the notes, April 2nd, and it was in the internal bus ops report by May. And the internal bus ops report is what shapes the bus operations response to load. So that's the demand response.
1730.
So the success was huge, and they wanted to also roll it out to subway, but they can really only do that based on research and surveys, because there is no tie to the fare collection system in the same way that there's passenger counters on the bus. So it's more of surveys and looking at historical trends. So it's not, the subway crowding data is based on history, not the right here, right now, like it is on a bus. Still very good and worthwhile putting out to the public, in my opinion. It seems that's been the response as well from everyone. It's better to have information that is considered to be accurate than to not put out the information, even if it is based on historical data. We talked a little bit about the determination of how it's being used. So there's really no way to determine who's using the data of crowding, when they're using the data of crowding, which routes, because the MBTA website, as I noted here, the crowding information is part of the regular schedule information. So there's no way with the current MBTA website to know, did somebody go to the website specifically to look at crowding, or were they just going to the MBTA website in order to look up the schedule? So there's a little bit of a gap in understanding how the crowding data is being consumed by riders, but they're still working on other ways that might be possible to do. I think there's a general sense that the crowding information is being consumed by riders, and they're hoping to be able to find ways to actually quantify that. So far, am I missing anything or misstating anything as far as everyone else who was there recalls?
Nope, sounds fine.
Excellent.
Yep.
Let's see, I hope I didn't skip over anything important worth mentioning. Yes, the iconography, I can't pull it up to show at the moment, but if you've seen the iconography of the not crowded, some crowding, crowded, with 1, 2, or 3 little people icons in the graphic, that was first done by the MBTA ahead of all other agencies in the country, and Logan called it open sourced. They open sourced the graphics, the iconography, made it available, and as my note says there, throughout the country and throughout the world, other transit agencies have adopted that, not only that classification, but also the graphics themselves. So MBTA not only led the way on that, but has also contributed to what other agencies globally are using for showing that crowding information. I believe I'm not leaving out any important parts of talking about the crowding. So the next section, unless anybody wants to jump in with something that I missed, we'll talk about the on-press project that's in the works. That's completely separate, completely unrelated to COVID response. Well, only as much as I guess it's not targeting an improvement in service that's needed because of the pandemic. On-press is the idea that if a trip could be shortened to make for a more reliable trip or to make a shorter trip, it's in the best interests of the T to provide a mechanism to have a rider, a customer, signal, I'm here, please pick me up. And if there was a lack of that signal, then the bus, they're talking about buses specifically because those are the sort of variable things, they're not on rails. Then the operator might have the option of bypassing a stop or a part of a route. The example cited was the Point of Pines as being really the perfect experiment for this, because on the 441, 442, the other 400 series routes that go up and down Route 1A in Point of Pines Revere, Mass, in order to service that one stop at Point of Pines, it can take multiple minutes, sometimes as much as 5 minutes, to get that vehicle off of Route 1A, circle around, make the stop, circle around again, get back on. So the idea is that there would be something like a button that would be pressed, something like a button at the stop, like a crosswalk button kind of thing, that the customer at that stop would press to say, I'm here, please pick me up. And the bus operator would get a signal, perhaps through the existing transit master dispatching and location system, saying, there's a person at Point of Pines who wants to get picked up. A lot has to go into that because the system would have to identify which vehicle is the one that's next going to be going past that stop or approaching that stop. Is it inbound or outbound? Would there have to be two push buttons, one to request, I'm going in the Boston direction or towards Wonderland. Am I going towards the Lynn direction? Doubles the hardware cost potentially. No, that sort of thing. So lots to work out. And then of course, if you're visually impaired, either blind or low visibility, would a physical button that's there like a crosswalk button even work in the first place? So they're thinking about providing low visibility and visually impaired riders with a push button that would be radio connected to a receiver at the stop and then serve the same function. So that a rider in that case wouldn't have to seek out a physically mounted permanent button. They would have their signal button with them. If that were to work, the signaling, then you'd want to have confirmation back to the customer waiting there that, yep, we got the signal, the bus will be here in X number of minutes, because you don't want to have, I mean, think of a crosswalk situation. How many times have any of us hit the crosswalk button and then we don't know when the walk sign's actually going to turn on? Am I going to get the walk sign in a minute or 3 minutes, or is it broken? So again, they're working out those issues. An example of a route that could benefit from on-demand changes is the 112, which has very circuitous portions of it that have very low ridership. So again, if there was a way of having customers signal, I'm here, I would like to be serviced by this next trip, then the bus would make that part of the route. If not, the vehicle could possibly bypass and save time, become more reliable. Jacob, go ahead, please.
I had asked if I know that there's a system like this that's on the what is it? Not the high speed line in Philadelphia. I had wondered,
SEPTA?
not SEPTA, the one that used to have Brill bullets on it.
I don't know.
Come
Sorry.
on, it's a commuter rail line with very
Okay, gotcha.
closely spaced stops.
Gotcha.
And they use it so that if the train is coming around a corner, it doesn't have to sort of slow down or pursue at reduced speed for flag stops. And I had asked if something like the bus button could be used on the commuter rail, and they, I guess, hadn't thought about that.
Yep, exactly right. Yeah, and that was something that I've actually asked a couple of my commuter rail conductor friends. Could there be a big lamp mounted alongside the tracks that would act like a signal to the engineer to say, hey, somebody wants to board at this flag stop? The fellows, there happen to be men, the commuter rail conductors that I asked about that, well, is there any viability to that? They thought, oh, that's interesting. I mean, they didn't rule it out. I'm not going to name any names, and we'll just say that a couple of fuelless commuter rail conductors thought that was a very interesting idea and possibly feasible. Jacob, I don't suppose you have handy any information about what you just did you say SEPTA?
Yes.
Would you want to put that up on a screen share?
Barry
Like, is
just
there
put it in
anything
the chat.
visual?
It's Barry just put it in the chat. It's the Norristown high-speed line.
Norristown. Excellent. Thank you, Barry.
I'm trying to find an image of one of the stop request buttons.
Yeah, no obligation,
There.
but if you come across one, that would be great to show as
Sure.
an example. The visual example that Logan Nash and Kevin Mulder, again from the customer technology group, showed with us was essentially looking just like a crosswalk button. And if you've seen any of the e-ink signs that are out for, I don't know the number of stops, but I know it's more than a dozen at this point when you figure bus, and there were some on the green line of a different type. The technology has definitely been proven. Adding one additional, I mean, speaking for myself, adding one additional set of e-ink signs at one stop, like Point of Pines, plus this hardware and development needed to make this Point of Pines stop a test, seems entirely reasonable. It seems like it's, as far as oversight goes, I think they're doing excellent work with minimal cost and potentially huge benefit for whatever that's worth.
Yeah, it was a great example they used. It's pretty devilish stop, actually.
Yeah, and it's also a good case because in that situation, there's really no alternative. I mean, because you've got a 45-mile-an-hour stretch leading up to Point of Pines. After that, you're basically going over the river at a very, like, there's basically no way to put a stop anywhere but where it is, which is that circuitous getting off, getting back on again. So they've really, I mean, you can tell that I'm very familiar with it. I personally have gone on that route of those 441, 442, etc. buses many times, and I know Wig, you said you have too.
Yeah, they're quicker than the alternatives sometimes. It's a pretty handy route, especially if the blue line is useful to you.
That's too bad. Jacob put into the chat, they've abandoned the stop request buttons on that Norristown line. I don't have a way of pulling up that link and sharing it, but Jacob, if you want to.
Any sense as to why?
No, but I imagine that if I can find that out pretty quickly.
Right.
Again, Jacob, feel free to share your screen, but no obligation. If you think it's relevant, please do.
Does someone have a copy of the main meeting minutes that we should take a look at?
I can probably pull that up in another couple of minutes. Let me, if you don't mind, I'll wrap up the rest of the
Yeah,
committee
of
report.
course, of course.
Okay,
Yeah, I
cool.
just
And
wanted to, I've been worried about that for a minute or two.
Oh, yeah, no problem. Again, we in my notes here. Let me put this back up on the screen. So as mentioned, we did talk about whether it's applicable to commuter rail and how it might work out. Talked about quite a bit of talk about how it would work with schedule planning. For example, is it going to be a problem if there's a system where the bus skips a part of the route, skips a stop? The people further down the route would be perhaps looking at their phone prediction saying, oh, the bus will be here in 5 minutes. If it shortcuts a part of the route, would the prediction suddenly go from it's 5 minutes away, it's 1 minute away? That's poor service if you're causing people to miss their trips because of a shortcut to save time. So they are going to consider how to adapt the real-time arrival predictions to account for if there is an on-demand stop and what if the vehicle bypasses because there's no demand. And then finally, yeah, I won't summarize my note there, but it's pretty much the same thing. And we also talked about possibilities, which I think are very exciting for the MBTA, particularly in the areas where there's outreach from the agency to community groups and riders via surveys. Perhaps the agency would mention the Rider Oversight Committee. Perhaps they would promote our own committee. Personally, I think it would benefit us by getting outreach to potential new members to fill what we have for so many open seats. And then it would, according to what Logan was saying, it would likely benefit the agency by having more people on the Rider Oversight Committee who would then be more able to provide broader feedback. I think the underlying feeling is from Logan and from people in his group that they really value our feedback and they would love to have more people. They would love to have more people on our committee to broaden the opinions. So it sounds like a great synergy between the agency promoting the ROC and the ROC being able to provide broader feedback to the agency. More on that to come. And with that, unless there's any questions, I can wrap up the that subcommittee report.
Oh, that was excellent.
Thank you. I'm glad I was able to get my computer up and running enough to be able to show the notes and read from them. I just realized that we had Karen on for a little while.
Yep.
But not at the moment, unless, nope, it looks like she had to disconnect. That's too bad. Okay, Wig, I'll let you take it back for our next section.
The next, the next thing is approval of minutes. And I don't have them in front of me, so do we want to wait for a minute and go into external, new or old business?
I think as far as minutes go, until or unless we have a representative from MassDOT to actually take minutes, I think we're relying on the Zoom automatic transcription or the YouTube transcription.
Great.
I don't recall if I don't think I've been sharing that with you. Would that be useful for you folks if every month I take the Zoom automatically generated transcript and share it out and we consider that to be our minutes?
Well, Stefan, what if you put it in in a Dropbox or something like that. And if you put them all there, people could check them out, at their leisure. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's a good idea. I'm a little concerned that by doing so, well, then again, I mean, I'm already sort of tying myself to the recorded videos because they're on my personal YouTube channel. So I guess it's not a bad
Well, why
thing
don't you
if I
think about it?
expand it to use, I mean, I could use my Google Drive, and so it'd at least be the same account.
Why don't you think about it and let us know what makes sense to you, since you've been doing the work?
Or as you suggest, you could just mail it, because it's not going to be a big file. It's going to be in the kilobyte range,
Yep, that's correct. Yeah, it's just text. It's just it's literally just Zoom.
Yeah,
or
that's fine.
And YouTube does the same thing. YouTube generates closed captioning, which is the equivalent of a written transcript. Yeah, I will poke on that between now and our next operations subcommittee. That would probably be a good thing to cover as a technical thing.
Actually,
so yeah, thank you for the idea.
Before we move forward, back on Logan and possible new members. I mean, one of the things that I think Logan realized towards the end was that we aren't your typical writer, and so he would have to find another box for us. I mean, when it comes to using us for feedback, and I think it might be good if we helped him figure out what kind of box we should be in, because we aren't a typical writer, and so how can we be helpful as someone that's not a typical writer? And so let's think about that.
All right. Do folks have external meetings that they want to report on? I know, Len, you kind of do that automatically with FMCB and the MPO, but
so for the MPO, let's see, we are still struggling with the fact that we have the money for the last year of the TIP, which is a year that we program, and we are trying to develop a policy that will prevent this from happening. And so there are tentative plans to create an ad hoc committee to come up with that policy. And I have some ideas. And should I share them now? Yeah, why not? We have time. So one of the ideas is that, well, see, the problem is that as far as I'm concerned, the problem is that projects are programmed in the TIP when they are 25% designed, and in the process design further means then you run into things, and it isn't even a matter of the scope changing as much as it is you run into things that you just didn't anticipate at the 25% design, and they almost always result in an increase in the cost of the project. And so the MPO has a policy of, well, making a commitment to the municipalities that once your program is in the TIP, we're going to stick with it. And part of that is a sense of obligation, because the municipalities have paid me for the design, not only to the 25%, but also beyond that. And it takes, of course, money, and significant money, especially for some of the smaller municipalities, to design out. And another issue, which probably the MPO can't really address, is the fact that the municipalities will often have to jump through a lot of hurdles within their own borders in order to make these things happen, like getting money from town meeting. And so they have invested a lot in it. So what I'm thinking the MPO can help with, though, is on the financing of the design. So Virginia, one of the Virginia MPOs, maybe maybe it's VA dot or whatever they call their transportation agency. They do all of the planning, and so because of that, they are able to say to a municipality, if the project costs go up, we're not going to fund it, and so they have a tighter control, over the projects, over the lifespan of the not the project so much, but the lifespan up until the point where it gets started. They start building it, and so it would require a change in our approach to things to do that. And also, they have cost benefit analysis, and we don't have that really. We have that in a sense in that we score the projects according to various metrics, and we kind of use those scores to help us determine what project we're going to do. So there's a bit of a CBA in that, but Virginia has a more tight CBA. I kind of do that myself a little bit when I look at the cost of the project, and I then see the points that are associated with it. And for me, certain points matter more than others. So the equity points that tend to matter to me more than expansion. But then again, not expansion, but like major intersections, or major infrastructure, not major intersection, major infrastructure projects. But even then, we, and myself in particular, you will score like projects against like projects. So you're not going to really compare major infrastructure project to a complete streets project. It's certainly not to rail trail project, and so I'm thinking less.
You just muted yourself.
Yeah, sorry about
Thanks.
that. Let's shift design responsibilities to the MPO or MassDOT or some other entity, so that if we put the project into the tip, well, two things. We can put the project into the tip when it's 25% design, and then say if it gets out of hand, we'll pull it out and you haven't lost any money. Or we can wait until later and put it in the tip. But in order to do that, the MPO would have to get involved in selecting projects even earlier. And so right now, it's a screen. The 25% design step is a screen. It's like we say to communities, well, you've got to determine what it is that you want to do, and then you present it to us. And then we pick from the things that you decide that you want to do. If we're going to take responsibility for the design, then to a large extent, people could just throw at us any number of ideas. So I could see our universe of ideas really expanding, and then we'd have to pick from that universe and say, okay, these are the ones that we are going to pay for the design of. But I would be up for the challenge. But I say that not be the person that would be doing the work, because it'd be the MPO staff doing the work, But we would have to review it. And so we would have this big universe. So it would be the board, along with the staff, doing the review of it. But undoubtedly, the lion's share of the work is going to fall on the staff. But I think it might lead to a better process overall. So those are my thoughts on it. So I put that out there so that you can think about it and give me some feedback. Like I said, we are likely to create this ad hoc committee. Brian Kane suggested it. I don't know if it's going to happen. I think it will, because the conversation pretty much stopped when he brought that up. And so if we're going to continue discussion, either we'll revive it at the next meeting, or we'll revive it in the context of an ad hoc committee. So there's that. And upcoming is the we will be looking at the universe of planning studies for what's called the UPWP. UPWP, which is the Unified Planning Work Program. And so that's at the next meeting on the 25th that we'll start ranking those projects in preparation for the final selection. So that's that for the MPO. If I can remember what happened at the advisory board executive
Hey,
committee.
Len, could I throw a couple
Sure.
comments or
Sure.
thoughts that, we could pick up or not at a later date? The first is that in a lot of the U.S., the regional planning agency and the regional surface transportation agency are integrated. And people who've looked at that have found that the project selection tends to be different when the surface transportation is part of the regional planning agency than when it's separate, like it is here.
Right.
So that's one issue, and I think it's an interesting issue. I haven't looked at comparisons of the two recently, but years ago I looked at them fairly carefully, and they just do come out different. The second thing is, and this will follow more directly on your comments, a lot of cities and towns don't have equal resources, as you mentioned, to get to the 25%. And
Right.
and that brings up the broad issue of civil rights and environmental justice. And that makes me kind of think back to Liz Moore, whose thesis at the Kennedy School was about that issue before she joined CTPS. And also Thomas Sanchez. I don't know if you folks know Thomas Sanchez, but that was his focus when he lived and worked in Massachusetts as a scholar in these issues. And he gave up. He literally threw up his hands in disgust and moved to California because he thought it was an intractable problem here that we were not paying attention to how to make sure that the communities that had the least capacity, including fiscal capacity, got the attention and the percent of projects that they really, really needed. So I just throw those two things out as peripherally related to what you just talked about in more depth.
Yeah, well, I think the equity argument is a good argument for us trying to pick up the design part of it. But as always, it's going to be, where does the money come from? Is it that MAPC can help pick that up? Do we really need to try to integrate that part of the process with our work with MAPC? I got to tell you, I don't think right now there's an appetite for combining MAPC and the MPO. The reason I say that is that the MPO is going through oh gosh, I'm completely blanking out the term. I'm on the steering committee for it.
All right.
But essentially, they are looking at the way the MPO staff functions. So
Is this the strategic plan?
Thank you. So it's a strategic plan. It's been a few months since we met. In fact, I was wondering what's happened. I think we're in the point when they are about to give us the final report, and so a lot of times there's a big gap between the draft and the final. But yeah, and it's a little bit of a chicken and egg in this one because I think the MPO itself is going to go through that, and that will impact a lot what the staff will do. But nonetheless, it was determined that it was a good idea to go ahead and determine the strategic plan for the staff. So but from that, I wasn't seeing a big push to merge with MAPC, but that probably wasn't the right place to bring it up anyways. So I'm going to pull back from my statement that I don't think there's a desire or strong desire to do that. that may pop up. I mean, if we do the strategic plan for the MPO itself.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah. So
So
go
do
ahead.
other folks have comments on external meetings?
It's a complete topic switch, but yes, I do. I want to make sure that I'm not cutting off anybody who wants to talk more about that previous topic.
Nope.
Okay, cool. I won't go into too much detail because it's Amtrak and not MBTA, but I just want to share really quick because I think it might be at very least interesting, and I'm happy to talk more about this. I mean, as there's interest or not. I went to the online Massachusetts Bay Railroad Enthusiasts meeting where the chief, my goodness, I believe he's the chief mechanical officer or the chief railroad officer for Amtrak, in charge of design and operations, presented about the new Acela train set. This is just a quick snapshot, more for just sharing it on YouTube. You don't need to look at the eye chart here, but it's a completely state-of-the-art high-speed train set. The old Acela system, if you're not aware, requires things like Windows 95 to hook up to it to do maintenance. So yeah, I mean, the current state-of-the-art high-speed rail in the U.S. requires Windows 95. That's the kind of thing that they're looking to replace. It's going to be greater seating capacity. That's the kind of layout. There was also a lot of talk of some of the nuts and bolts details. Here's their testing pattern. I know it's an eye chart. It's just to show all the levels of complexity that they do. Just for example,
can I ask a question?
Yeah, go for it.
So have they dealt with the issue of making it such that they, in the future system, they won't be stuck with an old OS? Or is that something that you just can't design for?
I don't want to put words in his mouth, but I believe I got the impression that yeah, it's just to a certain extent it's inevitable because there is a physical hardware component to it, which is either very expensive to upgrade in place and introduces all kinds of reliability and testing issues, or you just replace it entirely, which is what they're doing now with a brand new train set. So, I mean, I think the short answer is inherent in any system that's designed to have a 30+ year lifespan, like capital equipment for a for public transit. I think there is going to be a bit of lock-in that's inevitable.
All right, thank you.
Yeah, I think it's probably an issue across the transportation industry, right? Or even beyond transportation. Anything that you're buying today that you plan to have a 20-year life cycle, anything you buy today is heavily software dependent. There aren't everything's smart these days. It doesn't matter whether, I mean, the car you buy, the cars now stay on the road much longer than they did before, because they're better, well made, but at the same time, they all have digital, touch screens, and how, what's going to go first, the engine or the touch screen? It's probably going to be the touch screen, which is really weird to think you have this giant engine block that's humming along just fine, and it's the touch screen that breaks. Even appliances, right? You can buy a microwave today that has Alexa in it, but will Alexa still be around in 10 years, or will it be something else? Who knows? But it's a really good question, Len. So I don't disregard the question. My bet is there's a lot of people trying to find the answer and haven't found it yet.
Absolutely right. And by the way, for the record, there's no Windows 95 running on the Acela train. That's all, embedded systems and, hardware based. They have to talk to the train for diagnostics using software and a connection that requires Windows 95. So we're not putting the train itself in operation because of Windows 95. It's the diagnostics and
Right. So
maintenance.
you're telling me it's not screaming along at 65 miles an hour and gets the blue screen of death, and they have to reboot before they slam into the next station.
Correct. Nothing like that at all.
And
Okay.
I understood that. Thank you.
But okay, so real quick.
Do you have any fleet pictures?
I'm gonna get to it. Yeah.
Okay. You're building the. I get it.
There's an aspect of this that does relate to MBTA commuter rail, though, in that when you are making a curve at high speed, you have to accommodate that so that, as it's saying here, so that the passenger doesn't feel like they're going to go off the rails. And it's a very interesting thing. The train can be perfectly safe and not going to fly off the tracks, but unless there's compensation for it, which in the case of the Acela is an actual tilting mechanism, it feels like to the people that you're going around a corner so fast that you're about to jump off the tracks and crash, and that's a very uncomfortable thing. So this accommodating for cant deficiency is purely about the feeling to the passenger, but it's what requires, if I understand it right, that's what requires the Acela to be tilting. Most MBTA lines max out at something like 70. I think 79 is the maximum. So even around curves, they're able to bank the tracks to accommodate that. But if commuter rail for the MBTA ever becomes faster, this might come up to it. This might be involved. Here's an example of again, I'm not going to spend time on the slides, but they're being recorded. We can go back and look at them on YouTube. These are all from Amtrak. These are all public. Here's an example of what the different trains can do. The Acela can do a 7-inch, it's called cant deficiency, because it can tilt. Different trains can only do slower speeds. That's a look at the test equipment on the new Acela train. This is how they test for simulated passenger load. They pump in different amounts of water into tanks. So if they want to simulate an empty train, they just pump the water out. They want to simulate a train full of people, they pump water into the tanks. Pretty cool. Mock-up of the new trains. Where do you test the train? They have got, as it says, Torresville. That's a particular curve that's really good for testing. And they've even got areas up the blue, for example. The brand new Acela train set was running on the Northeast Corridor in that area of blue within, I believe you said, within the last couple of weeks.
Question?
Just
a question?
Yeah, go ahead, please.
So then let's say you're not going fast around that curve.
Mm-hmm.
Are you tilted and feeling uncomfortable?
It's actually exactly that. And I can attest to that because on my commuter rail line that I used to take twice a day before the pandemic, there's a section of track which is curved and designed for high speed at 70 miles an hour. And if the train encounters, if there's congestion or a problem on the line and the train has to either slow down or stop, more times than I can count, we'd be on the commuter rail train sitting at an angle and going, wow, this feels weird. Of course, you're stopped or you're going very slow, so it doesn't feel unsafe, but it is an uncomfortable sensation to be on that canted track and not going at the speed it's designed to serve. Does that answer your question, Len?
Yeah, it does. I mean, I assume that was the case, but I just figured I would ask in case there was some kind of correction that was built in that compensated for that. But okay, I didn't think so, but hey, we have the time, so I figured I'd ask. Thank you.
Yeah. These are just samples of the other trains from around the country that are brought into this area to be tested by Amtrak. They actually do testing for other agencies. There's the new Acela set. I found this particularly interesting, which is why I wanted to mention this, because similar kinds of issues happen for the MBTA because of, for example, green line and blue line use overhead catenary. There's issues where you've got temperature swings and the catenary cables have to be tensioned in a certain way. Otherwise, you're going to have saggy lines if things warm up. And you may have seen it out in areas of the D line. Actually, I think this is now on most of the green line above ground. You'll see counterweights which adjust basically the tension so that as the temperatures fluctuate, it's still maintaining a nice flat level catenary. Again, as the MBTA moves towards electrification, we may encounter these same kinds of things if we get up into speeds that are in the 100-mile-an-hour plus. I'm not sure if we would, but perhaps. Oh, and I asked, I just put this up because I asked one question about cost because the Northeast Corridor actually has 3 different voltage and frequency specs. So in order to go from Boston to Washington, D.C., the Acela trains and any other electric trains that are going in that area have to be able to switch from, I believe it's 25,000 volts, 50 hertz to 25,000 volts. Don't quote me on the exact numbers, but there's 3 different combinations of voltage and current. And I asked the question, how much additional cost does that add to it, as opposed to retrofitting the voltage being delivered? And the answer was, it's far cheaper to put that voltage conversion into the locomotive, the electric power car, as it's called. So again, it's a lesson for when the time comes for MBTA to be purchasing electric trains. We don't have to worry about the if there is, and it's a big if there was the need for MBTA rolling stock to be able to change from one voltage to another or one frequency to another, by far putting it in the rail vehicle itself is preferable to redoing existing infrastructure. Yep.
Hey, Stefan, Jacob has a question.
Yep. I thought I was finishing my sentence. Yeah, go ahead, Jacob, please.
I really don't see why that would be an issue on MBTA territory. If we decide to electrify, it seems like we'd go the route of electrifying at the world standard 25 kilovolts, 60 hertz, which has several advantages, mainly that equipment's available and we can just buy power straight off the grid. I don't think that, I know that, I mean, if we were planning to run MBTA units into Grand Central Terminal, for instance, or through other things, or I don't know, Weston, Massachusetts decides that it wants third rail at 650 volts instead of catenary for some reason, but we'll see. But that should not be an issue for us.
Yeah, that's a good point. I didn't know that what we have from Boston to, say, Providence or Boston to New York is the more modern.
Yeah. So what happened was that so the legacy electrification is in 3 chunks. So there was PRR, the chunk that was originally electrified by the Pennsylvania Railroad between Washington and New York. Essentially, that was electrified in chunks, and at some points it was third rail. But that was that chunk, which was 11 kilovolts. Some number hertz. And then there was the second chunk between north of Penn Station in New York and New Haven, Connecticut, which was electrified by the New Haven Railroad. And that's electrified at some other voltage. And then there was the third chunk between New Haven and Boston, which was electrified by Amtrak in the 90s and early 2000s so that they could run Acelas in. And that is electrified at the world standard 25 kilovolts. There's also the matter of the thing that you mentioned about constant tension catenary and counterweights. Not a lot of that is in place on the legacy electrical network. One of the other things, like they're retrofitting it into the older wires. One of the things, there's a video you can find on YouTube of the French driving a train really fast in the 1950s. If you run a train really, really fast, you can set up a wave in the wire. And because physics, that wave can travel faster than the train, or at least it can create destructive interference between the wire and the pantograph. So the French are trying to break rail speed limits with non-tension catenary, and they have this pantograph up, and it's just getting battered to bits against the wire, and so they have to have two pantographs so that the one can get destroyed. So the other advantage of constant tension, I can put up a video. The other advantage of constant tension catenary is that you can run trains faster under it.
You gotta get this guy hired at the MBTA before Jonathan Belcher leaves. I mean, so you can replace Jonathan. You know, so that's pretty pretty good, Jacob. Thank you.
I mean, fun additional fact. If we're on the Massachusetts Railroad Historical Society note, our very favorite railroad, the Boston and Maine, did actually run electric trains for a while. Yes, Mr. Wench. They ran.
Where was it? Where was that?
Hoosac. Smoke inhibition in Hoosac. There are videos on YouTube. Fun story. They ran it at the New Haven's standard voltage, and they ran it with like bog standard GE box cabs, which is the New Haven was also running, which they just ran from the 1910s until the electrification was retired in the 40s. The other interesting thing, I found an old Federal Power Commission report produced by a sort of combination of it. The Federal Power Commission was, think of it as sort of a combination, like it advocated for electrical power because it had a lot of like electric power people on it and also railroads, and they produced a report about extending railroad electrification. And one of the reports was extend the New Haven's electrification from New Haven to Boston, which the New Haven always wanted to do but never had the budget to do. The other one was extend the Boston and Maine's electrification from just Hoosac all the way to Mechanicsville on one end, where it would link up with New York Central extended electrification from New York, and to Boston on the other. So the entire Fitchburg main line would have been 11 kilovolts. Like one of the very more famous sort of alternate history what ifs is if the New Haven hadn't been blocked from buying the Boston and Maine in the 1910s and had more money, would they have built North-South Rail Link as a New Deal project in the 30s? And would we have, underutilized infrastructure because, we can't have nice things to this very day?
Oh, yeah.
Very good.
Yeah, very good.
Very good.
Stefan's wife is going to get jealous because you're making him smile more than she has.
Look,
Oh, you have no idea. Oh, you don't know.
Well, she probably talks rail to you also.
Unless there's anything else to talk about with the electrification, high speed, Amtrak, etc.
So,
as I know, no, go ahead.
Yeah. So, just a couple of naive questions. So, with the tilt, you're still tilted when you go around that corner fast. You just don't feel it, right? So, if you had like a glass of water on the table, it would still be at risk of, well, I guess the acceleration would keep it on, so it wouldn't be at risk of falling because the acceleration is going to keep it there. But if you had like a leveler, you'd still be tilted in the train.
Yeah, and actually, that's a good point. I mean, my understanding is, if the Acela did not tilt, yes, you would have problems with stuff sliding off because the force that a human feels that makes you feel really uncomfortable unless you're compensating for that.
Right.
It's a tangible force. Yeah, Jacob.
One more brief note about the Acela tilt mechanism. I think Wig and Len, you might be able to correct me on this, but like the maximum tilt of the old Acela trains is actually greater than sort of the gap that is allowed to be between trains between New Haven and Boston. So they can't actually tilt.
Actually, he said that is a incorrect rumor. Somebody asked him about that, and I because I don't, my computer's still not completely back together again. I can't share the link, but the Mass Bay Railroad Enthusiasts MBRE meeting that I watched is available on either YouTube or Facebook for free. I highly recommend watching it because somebody asked about that. Somebody asked about the tilting, not allowing for proper clearance in some areas, and he said, nope, there's absolutely no truth to that. That's just me parroting what he had said. But yeah, Jacob, if I don't send the link out to that to the mailing list, please remind me.
So, and one more question. So, look, I mean, I think heat is going to be a big issue. I mean, I think extreme heat is going to probably be more of an issue for us than the extreme cold that we're seeing in Texas. And we know that has a dozen number on rail. I mean, is there a sense, that these tilted tracks, or these uneven tracks, are harder to maintain under extreme heat conditions?
I'm not aware of any heat-related problems for properly installed, properly maintained track.
Okay.
It's got to be done. It's got to be installed under the right conditions with the right techniques to make sure that there is expansion and contraction as temperatures change. I mean, as it heats up, it gets essentially longer.
Yeah.
For lack of a better term. So it puts pressure for it to sort of spring outwards. In other words, the rail is continuous, so it can't really get longer because it's pushing against itself. What happens is, as it warms up, the spring tension wants to make it jump outwards.
Right.
And if the rail isn't installed at the right tension in the first place, and if all the fasteners onto the ties aren't done properly, yeah, you can have conditions where a rail will either widen the gauge or length or shorten the gauge. Either way, yeah, that's a derailment. But it's, again, if it's done right, the temperature swings in that environment can be handled no problem.
So where is the stress absorbed then if the rail is translating it to something else so that the rail can maintain the right, can maintain what it needs in order to not cause derailment?
If I understand it right, it all has to do with the temperature at which the rail is put down in the first place. So they try to put it down in a median temperature, like a middle of the road temperature, so that it can sustain swings cold and swings hot. I'm pretty confident about that. I mean, Jacob might be able to contribute to that, but I believe that as long as it's installed within a range, it can handle a swing hot and a swing cold.
All right.
I think, yeah, rail is surprisingly elastic, especially, a good place to see this now is when they're doing installation on Green Line, because you have these long strings of steel, which look like spaghetti. So theoretically, because it's sort of tensily flexible, it can get longer and get shorter, just sort of within a tolerance. And modern steels are much better at that than older steels.
And if I have a vague recollection of a piece of track maintenance equipment actually having massive propane heaters on board to heat up rail in circumstances where it's necessary. If, for example, you've got to do track replacement in the winter, they'll actually have these huge heaters along the length of track to warm it up so that you've basically like pre-stressing it in the way that you want.
Yeah, that makes sense. I think, though, that New England probably won't be where problems show up. I mean, there are many climates, including in the U.S., that have more extreme variation than we do, right? Like high desert can be much hotter than us or much colder than us.
Well, it has shown up. I mean, there was a big project in order to re-stress, to properly stress the Worcester Framingham line, I think as recently as 2 or 3 years ago, and it caused major disruptions because they had to basically go along every inch of track and retension at the right point in the year, the right temperature. And that was because if I understand it right, that's because CSX, who had originally owned the tracks and maintained it, was maintaining the tracks for freight and the relatively lower speeds of freight. And so when there would be hot days, the tracks would heat up and they wouldn't be safe for commuter rail. And so MBCR and Keolis had to slow everything down, causing huge delays Worcester to Framingham until MBTA bought the tracks from CSX and then went through and redid everything.
Well, they may just not have maintained them over the years. Certainly California has probably 50 times the rail freight that we have, because that's where all the stuff comes into the ports in Southern California. And those trains all go through deserts, and, they're vastly hotter than we ever get here. So, maybe it was just a maintenance issue. They weren't kind of keeping on track of it. I didn't mean to make a pun there.
That was good.
No, it was unintentional.
Yep, I know.
If I could, I'm sorry, go ahead, Stefan.
Well, I know that we just turned to be 6:30, but unless people are anxious to get off, or unless Emily or Rachel don't have anything new, I wanted to at least give the opportunity for Rachel and Emily to give us anything new from your groups. But Wig, I also wanted to defer to you for you were just about to say something for another time.
Yeah. I'll be really short. I have two things under old and new business. One is, I raised the issue of a GLX tour, and I think that we should do that this spring. I think that for the committee, it would be more interesting to see it kind of in midstream construction. I mean, you can see it forever once it's open, but you can't see it the way it is now once it gets to the end of this year. You'll never again be able to see kind of the drama of the construction period. So if folks have ideas, I don't want to discuss it or finalize it now, but if folks have ideas on when a tour might be best, meaning like day of week or whatever, just think about them and then maybe shoot me an email, or we can discuss it at our next meeting, because I don't want that. They're really flat out right now, and it's pretty interesting still. But once we get to fall, they're going to be wrapping the project, so you're not going to see all that stuff. The second thing I wanted to bring up is completely new, but the men's room at North Station has been out for 3 weeks and nobody is working on it. And, you cannot have even a medium quality transit system the size of Boston's without much better restrooms than we have. And at some point, I know it's a mundane topic, but go to any train station in the Netherlands or in Asia or almost anywhere in Europe, and even Mexico City or Sao Paulo, Brazil, the facilities are vastly better. You can't expect people, especially at a major station like North Station, there are no options, for people who are waiting at North Station and have to go to the bathroom. They have to leave. So, but it's true all over. I mean, the restrooms are pretty much horrible in a lot of the T that has high use. So anyway, not for further discussion tonight. So I'm going to stop. Okay, what's up next?
Just the offer to Emily or Rachel, if you wanted to share anything new, notable, no obligation whatsoever. Just wanted to give you the opportunity. And if there's nothing new to share, then just pass. That's fine. Totally fine.
Sorry if I can go.
You can go ahead, Rachel.
Okay. So just a quick update on the status from Forging Ahead. We are working towards the summer schedule, and then thinking, of course, about the fall being sort of what's happening, everything around the reopening plans that we're seeing and hearing about. So just a few quick updates that are happening. So there will not be, I'm just reading through my notes too, so sorry if I'm looking to the side.
No problem.
Yeah, so there isn't going to be a further cut in terms of bus service for the summer. And then there's also talk right now about trying to figure out how to get some level of restoration on the subway lines in the summer period. And then similarly on the buses, there's sort of, maybe there'll be opportunities in the summer to do a little bit of restoration, but the fall sort of being the big plan. When there's more, there's sort of, we know more's coming. So there's a lot of thinking happening. But yeah, I think in terms of what we're seeing right now is that really to get up to the full, like a full reinstallation of service, we're looking out a little bit further into 2022. And part of that is that there's a lot of thinking about sort of how do we do that with an equity eye. And considering the fact that some of the routes, some of the service cuts that have happened have been to add service to places that there's crowding. So some routes have seen, more service right now than they had before, and that's because there's been this sort of shift from point A to point B. But again, there's a lot of thinking happening around summer and fall, so we are keeping an eye.
Yeah, I really appreciate hearing that because a lot of times people think, well, returning things to the way they were is better, but as you just said, changes were made to meet the demand, and that is actually making the system under the way it's currently being used more equitable, and so we can't just undo what we've done and then think we have a system that is as equitable as the system was before the pandemic. That is a change. So thanks for elucidating that. I appreciate it.
And then it's mentioned once in the paper.
Much more to come.
Yeah, thank you, Rachel. Emily, anything to share with us?
Nothing too big to report. We're in the middle of a lot of projects, and I'll hopefully have some interesting things coming that are going to wrap up in about June. But we're moving forward on a lot of cool analysis that I'm sure you guys will love to play around with. So more of a tease than a update.
No, I like teases. Great,
That's
thank you.
Yeah. Excellent, thanks. I just realized, Rachel, Josh Weiland is your colleague, right? Okay, excellent. I believe Josh is our new regular attendee for the subcommittee from your group. I won't do it now because it's very specific to my region, but knowing that Josh will be joining us in 2 weeks, I'll cover some specific back to school and bus routing things with him.
Okay.
If you run into him, which I'm sure you will on Zoom, let him know that I'll be asking him about the Lynn region stuff as it's going to be affected by Lynn going back to school if and when they do. I'm sure they will.
I'll let him know because he's not working with the Lynn Garage, so he might want to confer with the planner who's got that.
Oh, okay, sure. Well, I'm glad I mentioned it then. If you just want to give a heads up, yeah. I'll tell you the 30-second additional piece is, if I understand it right, apparently something like 80 to 85% of Lynn high school students who don't have driver's licenses and their own cars, or maybe even including middle school students, take MBTA buses. So at the beginning of the pandemic, I asked Rob Guptill about, well, what if, with all the service cutbacks, what if Lynn specifically said, we're going to go back to school full-time in class? And Rob was like, we couldn't do it. There's no way we could maintain proper distancing on the buses with the service that we're able to provide in the Lynn area with the number of students that in the Lynn public school system rely on MBTA buses. And so there was basically Rob, I hope I'm not putting him on the spot by saying this on the record, but it was basically Rob saying, if Lynn went fully back to in-person class, we couldn't accommodate them. So now that there's more orders from the executive branch at the Commonwealth saying thou shalt go back to school, I just want to make sure, again, this is my personal interest being a Lynn resident. I want to make sure that the right coordination is happening. There you go. I probably said
Sure.
way too much for this, but again,
I'll
Yep.
get the message to the team.
Yep.
I'm sorry, Len, say it again.
I said, yep. I was just in agreement with you.
That's fair. That's totally fine. Well, speaking for myself, I've got nothing else to share, and we're actually 10 minutes over what we had put out as the official schedule. So I'll just open it up. Wig as our co-chair, and other members, anyone else, other items. I'm happy to entertain a motion to adjourn if there's nothing else. Oh, public comment, Barry. I almost forgot to offer. Do you want to put a question into the chat for public comment, Barry, specifically? And also, Craig, you haven't been very talkative tonight. Are you all set? Did you have an opportunity to?
You chimed in.
Yeah, oh yeah. It just not as much as.
Yeah, I'm quiet today. I'm not that, but I miss having a guest. I like peppering the guests with my my deep and meaningful questions. So this is you did an excellent job of recounting the subcommittee. So there was nothing for me to add there.
Well, just come to an executive committee meeting and give us some ideas and help us get some guests, Mr. Lasglowski. I'm sorry, I screwed up your last name because I have a mask on.
I didn't mean to complain. It was not a complaint. It was more a explanation.
I offered as an invitation.
No, I appreciate it. If I don't help getting, I always know if I don't help getting the guest, I can't complain about the quality of the guest.
We appreciate any assistance.
Craig, well, before you mute yourself again, are you sure you don't want to continue your streak and say Mattapan high-speed line?
I do because, and this is you asked for this. I was not going to correct you, but when talking about catenary, you failed to mention the Mattapan high-speed line when you gave examples across the MBTA system. So, your omission was duly noted now in the public record. But you can't forget about catenary on the Mattapan high-speed line.
All right.
You know, there is one other thing that folks might want to pay attention to, and that's Logan Airport's traffic. They had massive layoffs and massive cutbacks, and they have just had a massive uptick in traffic at Logan, in customer traffic and flights, which I think surprised them. And so I assume that will have some interface with the surface system at some point if it continues.
Definitely SL3 and Blue Line, yeah.
Yeah.
Or people be driving and taking the train to their destination instead of the planes.
What's interesting to me is that's a parallel to the T, right? Where the amount of time it takes to ramp up any service, whether it doesn't matter what it is, to either ramp up or ramp down a large public service, be it MBTA or be it Massport, it just takes time. Whether it's negotiating with the union or it's the public announcements or it's the careful planning that you go into it. So it's interesting that they are being their timing seems to be just as bad as the T's timing in terms of, at least from a public perception, of the cuts are happening at the same time that service is now slowly ramping up. It seems like they actually have a worse problem than the MBTA because the MBTA service hasn't ramped up, even with the public, even with the political outcry around the MBTA. it's interesting you're not hearing anything about Massport's not being thrown in that same bucket yet, even though they may have a more acute problem than the MBTA might have.
I think they do, and that's part of the reason I brought it up. They had either laid off or had early retirement of a lot of their key employees, whom the corollary of this group interfaces with. I'd say half or more, well, more than half the people that the Massport CAC interfaces with, and the Massport CAC is a bigger group with more financing than this group by far. More than half the people we interfaced with left a little over, in 2 to 3 months ago. And now now their volume has popped way back up again. And, our staff and funding were cut. I mean, we were happy to go along with agency cuts, but everybody's got caught here by that sudden surge at Logan.
All right.
Okay.
So motion to adjourn.
Actually, I'm just for the record, let me read in what Barry typed into the chat. We asked if Barry had public comment, and he typed into the chat, yes, at the MBR meeting, they said that the existing Acela equipment could not be rehabilitated. And that's a very good point, Barry. Yes, they're not doing anything with it. It's just once the new one's online, the old one is going to go to the scrapper. And also Barry says, also the AM fleet equipment is aging and it's getting more expensive to maintain. Yes, absolutely. That's AM fleet is the standard regional, not high speed, but I think it's rated to go to 80 or 90 miles an hour. Yeah, Amtrak is coming up on an additional equipment renewal cycle, not just on the Acela. Thank you for that, Barry. I was about to hear a motion to adjourn from somebody.
Yep.
And I'll second that. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. Stay well.
Thanks, guys. Jacob, I'm assuming I'll see you at the DRC meeting.
I'll be there.